Welcome, everyone. I'm Laura DeFranco, the CEO of Brave Healer Productions, where we have a mission to wake the world up to what is possible, one brave word at a time. And here today to help me with that mission is Amy Gillespie Dougherty, the lead author of a new book that we have coming out called The Ancestors Within. Recognize and embrace the gifts of your origins. You guys, this is book 3 in Amy's series. Welcome, Amy.
Thank you. I'm so excited to be here.
All right, let me tell you guys about Amy. Amy Gillespie Dougherty is lead author of the Ancestors Within book series and journals, host of the upcoming Ancestors Within podcast. That's exciting. And the Ancestral Summit coming a little bit later this year, right?
Correct.
Yes. She's on a mission to change the way you experience your ancestors with Irigenics Ancestral Eye Reading. And I've got you hooked up in the show notes with her website. So go explore, you guys, after the show. Amy, you know, we've been here a time or two together talking about this subject. I'm super happy to have you back, and with book 3, getting book 4 started as well in this last couple of weeks. It's been an exciting, amazing, and transformative ride. I have to just start by telling you that as somebody who chose healing as a path, a lifelong path, when I met you and started to understand about ancestral healing and read your chapters, your author's chapters in these books, I got that moment of what was possible. And I thank you for that.
You're so welcome. And thank you for sharing with, the people who are watching that can be their experience as well, especially those people who've never considered that their ancestors have any impact in their life, or feel like all they've got is bad karma, or like ancestors that were broke, or I just don't even know who my ancestors are, so it doesn't matter. But our ancestors are here. They're inside of us. And so they're in our daily experience. And these book chapters bring you to numerous ways of how you can experience your ancestors, especially if you don't know who they are.
So how'd you even get started in this ancestral healing realm? And I've heard this story a couple of times, but I want the viewers to understand how this even happened for you.
It's a kind of an odd story. I was in corporate America, and along the way, I wound up going to Africa, and I was building survival skills programs for children there. Basic safety and survival, landmines, water, all different kinds of safety, accident prevention. And when I came back to the States, I kind of wanted to continue in that survival skills area. And I was taking a class on conscious language, on how we kind of speak what our subconscious has going on. And that person had a course called biooptic holography, reading the eyes for belief patterns. And I thought, well, that's just the coolest thing. But all the way along, I discovered that I was thinking, now, wait a minute. If we have a marking for sibling rivalry in our eyes when we're born, and we're the oldest child, how does that work? I mean, we don't have any siblings yet. Then does it keep changing? Or, how does that keep changing? Well, along the way, as I was doing ancestral eye reading, I discovered that our ancestors' images actually show up in our eyes, in period clothing, doing what they were doing, kind of like a mini series of Outlander going on in our eyes. And that's when I realized that, you know what, our ancestors are within us. Even if we don't know who they are, they're one of the greatest impacts in our daily life. And the work has just continued from there, just evolving as we go.
I was listening to you talk about this in one of your interviews recently, and I was just chuckling to myself because the gentleman who was interviewing you, I could tell, was fascinated, as am I all the time, about this subject. And I just was looking at his face, like, as you were talking about the images, and we could talk all day long about what that is. You have read my eyes, you've shared with me your work and done a reading for me and explained what you're seeing and helped me understand, what that was. And again, I have to say this is really fascinating. It opens people's perspective up to what's possible in terms, for me anyway, of healing things you may have not even realized you could have access to.
Right. Well, it's this part of our lives where, some of these things just keep happening over and over, like overdrawing your checkbook. You wouldn't think about your ancestors for that, right? You think, what's wrong with me, right? And then starts the self-beating, then starts that boring story of what's wrong with me, why am I not good enough, et cetera, et cetera. But perhaps you have an ancestor who regretted signing something too quickly. Maybe they bought a farm and it turned out there was some unknown information. And as they signed the check, right? Now you're stepping into a pattern of, why did I sign that? Why didn't I wait? Or a signing of, you sign something and later you realize you don't have the funds. Maybe people who went through the depression. So these patterns come back and back. And that's really what our first book was all about, was repeat patterns. Whereas this book's all about gifts. This is the fun stuff. This is, those talents, that quirky little dance we do, our ability to doodle that we never turned into a vocation. But where did that come from? That came from our ancestors just as much as some of those more problem incidents during the day.
Well, so thank you for going there, because that was my next question, was just share more about the theme of this third book. So those gifts moving through, right? I was sitting thinking about you and doing this interview the other day, and I thought, I'm going to ask her about, like, well, I don't know who the writer was. Like, I'm not sure of who those people were a generation, 2 generations before. I don't know. What would you tell me about that? How can I connect, even though I have no idea?
That's a great question. And it's one that actually some of our authors even asked. We had some authors who were very gifted artisans who said, well, I'm not sure which ancestor, I'm not even sure this is ancestral. And my answer from my experience is, if you're passionate about it and you love to do it, it's ancestral. You were loaded with it. So you're right. You might not know who that author was. But from the very first book, I've put in a lot of tools that are like, keep your crib notes, build your clues, because one day, 10 years from now, you're going to uncover something and go, oh my gosh, that's where that came from, that oddity, that quirky gift you have. But if you don't know, if you're like, gosh, I don't know who the writer was, then we offer some exercises in our books on things like channeled writing, where you can sit down and go into kind of a half meditative state with a pen and paper and ask, who was the author? What was my intention for having this gift? Where was I meant to take this? Chances are in your case, Laura, it's not just authors, it's publishers, right? Somewhere back in there is probably someone who is publishing Bibles or publishing some of the first works from the Germanic universities. We often don't have that trail. We don't always have that paperwork trail, but that's kind of the point, is we don't really need it because it exists within us. And if it exists within us, it's ancestral.
Mm. Yeah, the author, the publisher, the poet, for sure. I know there are poets back there somewhere. Since I met you and since I've read through these books, I have placed one of the photos that I have from when my grandparents, who both came from Italy to America and came to San Francisco and bought property and opened up. My grandfather was a barber, grandma was the beauty shop woman, and they had their property right next to each other, those little places. And I have this beautiful photo. And since understanding about this subject, I framed it and I created an altar with that photo. I've always loved looking at that photo, but it really has so much more meaning to me now, which was one of the gifts. I think those ancestors were entrepreneurs, man.
Yeah.
And that definitely came through. Right.
They were, like you said, they were soulpreneurs. They were entrepreneurs. They jumped in, even if they barely spoke the language, they built their clientele. And so they were shopkeepers. But also, if you've got, barber beauty shop, back in that line somewhere, you've got someone who was doing the hair of the queens or the noble ladies or noblemen. And I'm sure that karate piece is somewhere in there. I think I recall seeing some athletic people in your eyes. And that athletic thing, it's kind of interesting. That always shows up in the eyes when there's been someone doing trapeze or ballet or anything like that. They're very, very quick to appear in the eyes, just to say, hey, that little dance you do, that was us. You're doing our dance. And that's the thing, Laura, right? When you're humming a song in your kitchen, you don't know that that was a song that your ancestor 300 years ago hummed while they were picking flowers, right? You just don't know. So some of the adventure is in using your imagination to connect with them.
Okay, so yeah, this is so much fun talking about this. The author cast that you put together for these books are amazing. So if you're listening, co-authors of any of the books, thank you so much for being a part of this and offering your beautiful, vulnerable stories and then master tools for playing in this field of ancestral healing. Thank you so much for that. But honestly, Amy, I feel like every single one of those authors is sharing a gift of awareness. It takes that to the next level for the reader. How are you feeling about this community of authors that you've built?
Well, we do have a Facebook community, the Ancestors Within community, where people can join. As you said, we've just started on book 4 a couple weeks ago, and that will be 74 authors with 101 chapters, meaning 101 resources and tools for our readers to figure out new ways to connect with their ancestors. And I feel like every one of these authors has shown up divinely. I've trusted that if they were meant to be in these books, their ancestors made sure they got here in whatever way. And I just open to allowance for each of them. I'll share that with book 3, I had COVID for a week in January. And during that time, I mean, I wasn't feeling very well. I was sleeping a lot. And I was like, oh my gosh, I've got to get these authors together. And I swear 15 authors came out of nowhere. Some of them, I still couldn't tell you exactly how they found me, how they got my cell phone number, how they were texting me saying, I got to be in your book. But for me, the answer was always the same. If you're here, your ancestors sent you here, and it's up to me to just guide you in if this is a fit for your current life or not. And if it is, then come on in, all aboard.
I love that. I love the magic of that. And you and I are law of attraction fans, and we understand that the energy is what sets that magic up. But energy of the ancestors is just a new way to think about that, right? We have more than just ourselves on our posse here.
Absolutely. We have, in 400 years, we have 4,000 ancestors. We have quite a support team behind us. And so when we're stepping into an intention that has anything to do with their intentions, you know, when we do something in our world that we're like, yes, they're back there going, yes. And when we do something that we're like, oh, crumb, they're back there going, oh, that was me, 1537. I was on this ship. That one's mine. Sorry. You know, and these books are just a great way to tap into that energy. As you know, when you and I first talked about ancestors, I was like, well, how do you feel about ancestors? And you were like, I get it. You're like, I get the ancestor thing, but I don't know if I've really experienced it at the kind of level you're talking about. And now you see so much more sacred connection, I think, with them from, you know, from just coming through these books and these author stories and these tools, these other unique ways to just have a totally new experience. Just try out something new.
Yeah, definitely the feeling that you're helping me understand, even just right now as I'm listening to you, is the connection in the way that it helps you feel not alone. Even when you're sitting alone at your desk doing your writing like I do, I know that I have that backup, and it's a really fun, cool feeling to understand that. It helps you just sit and smile and be at peace, knowing that if you need some help, all you got to do is ask. And many of your authors give us tools for that asking, specific ways to connect. And it's just been really, really exciting. You mentioned a couple things within your bio, the podcast and the summit. So tell us more about what you got going on right now.
Well, the Ancestral Summit will be coming up November 7th to 11th. It's an online summit, and it'll be featuring 101 voices and perspectives of ancestral connection. So you'll be catching the podcast from each of our authors. Some of them will be having some special offerings and free opt-ins, free tools, as well as we're going to have some panels specific to each of the books, one on repeat patterns, one on discovering and connecting, one on gifts and abilities, one on celebrating and honoring, and another on how to be a good ancestor to your prodigy. And the podcasts are a big piece of that. We are, at first, we're going through each of the authors from our books, but then we'll be expanding more into even more ancestral aspects, like those who do DNA testing and genealogy and other aspects of ancestry. So it'll be all different versions of ancestry again. And we're hoping to have that all up and launched this month yet, during May. And then again, they will all be available as we get to the summit in November. Exciting.
Oh my
Huh?
goodness. Yeah, very exciting. It's a lot coming with this. I mean, sometimes I think to myself, how the heck did we do 4 books in the amount of time that, we were able to organize all of that? You guys, it is a treasure chest worth of information and really life-changing, transformational kind of tools. I know, Amy, I speak for Amy when I say we are really excited about sharing this with you. And of course, we mentioned briefly the Ancestors Within community on Facebook. I've got you guys hooked up down below because I believe that this is one of the biggest gifts with the book series specifically, that after you read a chapter or the books, come on in and rub elbows with the experts. You can ask questions about their chapters. You can be in there with the authors and understand next steps to take or get support. And, where do you get that with book authors? So come on and explore, join the community on Facebook. Anything else you want to say about that, Amy?
Just that, this is all just possible, as you said, because of the effort, gift, and the willingness of our authors to come in and share their stories, sometimes very, very vulnerable stories, but also some really powerful tools. I mean, some of them you read and you're like, really? That's all I would have taken to get through my issue with my weight or my issue with my mother-in-law or whatever the case may be. I mean, it's just unreal the amount of talented offerings that are available just for reading. And as you know, they come out on Kindle at what, $1.99 up to maybe $4.99, for 25 tools. It's really a great opportunity.
So let's wrap up today with one last question for our viewers. In terms of ancestral healing, what do you most want people to understand about this?
I want people to understand that even if you don't know who your ancestors are, and especially if you don't know who your ancestors are, they're in what you love, they're in what you fear, they're in your breath, they're in that little dance you do in the kitchen, they're in all aspects of your world, and they're there to back you up. Your ancestors have waited your whole life for this moment and for your next.
You are passionate about people that have been adopted. Let's finish by talking about that for just a moment.
Please. So I was adopted and at birth and knew pretty much nothing about my family. I was adopted through a religious adoption agency. And so back in those days, there was no handoff of information. And I met my birth mother when I was 19 and my birth father when I was 54. And that's when I got to see that so much of not only my gifts, talents, and abilities came from them, that I could literally go back and specifically, tag them. My birth mother and I worked for the same company in the same office and even sat at the same desk at least once, without ever knowing it, when it was 3 hours from where either one of us grew up. My birth father did profiling of fingerprints and I do profiling of eyes. And we have other people in the family who are in the eye industry. And actually, each of my cousins took a career, including the college that I was going to take, unbeknownst to any of us. So I wasn't able to tap into those clues until 55 years later. But I kind of tracked, tracked some of these notes. And now I'm actually able to do that comparison. And so that's what I really encourage people to do, is just know what you love, know what's distinct about you, especially if you're adopted and you think, gosh, I don't know anything. If you have something that happens over and over and over again, it's ancestral. If you have a unique gift or ability or something, you're like, well, none of these people I'm living with do this, it's ancestral. And so take it on, love it, embrace it, love on those ancestors behind you, and love on what your adopted family is bringing to your world as well, because they're giving you a great opportunity to resolve ancestral patterns in a new environment and to come up with new tools in a new environment. Our parents are just the portal to get to those ancestors behind us. The only way to them is through the parents that we've got. So some people have really rough parent-child relationships, and this is a great time to just put a ton of love on that and realize that they were your way to get here now. And so use that in your self-esteem toolbox. You were loaded with the intentions and gifts of your ancestors. So you've got all that support behind you at all times.
Yes, I love that so much. Oh my goodness, love this topic. Love you. Amy, thank you so much for what you do in the world and for being here today to share it with everyone.
Well, Laura DeFranco, I don't think anyone else could have gotten us published 4 books in 600 days than Brave Healer Productions. I think you and your ancestors get some kudos on this as well, my dear.
We know for sure it just isn't me alone at this point, right? Like, yes, my team back there. I can feel them, Amy, thanks to you. All right, everybody watching, please remember you are invited to our live stream book launch party, June 7th, 12 noon Eastern. We're going to gather with all of the ancestors within authors. We're going to be doing some fun giveaways, and you're going to find us on the Brave Healer Productions Facebook page for that. I've got the link down below. And if you happen to be listening after the 7th, well, that means the book is ready on Amazon and you should hop on over and grab your copy. And remember, lastly, your words change the world when you're brave enough to share them. So it's time to be brave. See you next time, everyone. Thank you, Amy.
Thanks, Laura.